Okay, today we're going to look at what this historian here that's looking into this actually calls somehow a coincidence. We'll see if we can peer through this and see what the coincidence actually contains. For what they've noticed here is that there's a showing of this master of beast pose, master of animals, if you will, kind of in a two-way motif. There are some depictions that look like a man holding two beasts apart, quite often a snake, quite often cattle, quite often lions. But also the other motif is something that reminds you of Snow White, where she goes out into the forest whistling and singing and all the animals come up, kind of like Bambi or something. And that's a reality too, but we'll get into that. Here we see a few different depictions of this Master of Beast, as you commonly refer to it. Though if you try to look that up in Google image search, you actually find a bunch of Pokemon cards now. Because like so many things of the ancients, it's been written over by something silly like Pokemon cards, and it's hard for you to pick through that and find actual pictures. Whenever just years ago I did a video about this and was able to just type that simply in there and show you about 20 different motifs all over the place. And I kind of showed the idea that, well, it's not just in this one area. Here it is in another one, and another one, and another one. But also in that same fact, here's something like in the top left-hand corner, which is prehistoric. And here's one over here. And there's one up here in this cave system too. And it seemed to be a common motif that gets put about through that because mankind went through something that seemed like he was having to fight off the beast pretty much. And then after the fact, he was the master of beasts. And I'm sure after the Younger Dryas event and a lot of the mammoths and larger creatures of the planet that would have been against him and caused him much strife had pretty much left the situation, they realized they were masters of beasts. This picture in the bottom left is kind of odd. I think it's a Greek type or Mycenaean type of picture, but in that same effect, it always reminds me of the ancient Sumerian lyre, or the giant lyre that they actually excavated, woolly even excavated from the ancient city of Ur, where they've got this bull on the front of it, but the bull is bearded, much like these people here. And if you look at their depictions, there's something like a cow with human heads on them. Yeah. But also making sure the guy in the center is looking like he has a similar motif. You can see that in that candelabra to the right here, where it's holding two snakes coming together, or somehow seemingly like two snakes. But it also looks like it could be a phoenix or a griffin or some mythological creature, but it's still there. In fact, on the lower tier there down at the bottom, you can see cattle facing each way that also have their grip upon that. But how far does this go back? Well, there are cave paintings that have this in there. But once you reach a certain point, it looks like that we were against a lot of these animals. And you can see a lot of the animals' motifs and very few people motifs whatsoever on cave art and so on. And then later it kind of changes. But let's go through this here a little bit and see if we can find the commonality between these and coincidences, as they call them, because it's found in the ancient giraffe culture of ancient India, and the sites that are associated along with that, such as Mohenjo-Daro and areas like that, and into India. But also there are other, quite often gold effigies too, of this same griffin-looking creature, but also found in Celtic lands way over here in the west. It's kind of crazy when you look at it, from the Nile Valley River all the way to, But I wonder if, having seen other videos that I've gone through recently, if you can start to make a connection who these people are that carry this idea around. Because it's called the beast master or the animal master quite often, and whenever you see it, it's a real common motif in ancient Sumerians. And here we're seeing something that looks like a Pegasus, or perhaps even a centaur, but centaurs are really human body from the waist up with the whole torso, and this is a horse with just a human head on it, but then he does have wings like Pegasus. And if you look, they have fleur-de-lis coming out the tops of their hats. But this is a common depiction, and it's something that's seen in Sumeria. But where else can it be seen? Well, we've already seen India in a couple of places, but it can be found in ancient Egypt, which we'll get into here just shortly, along with other ones. Here's a common motif on your left. On your right, though, is that other depiction where it seems to have been someone who can capture the creatures by just his song, kind of like a Pied Piper, if you will, because he's got his lyre playing his music and showing up in the picture. Well, it's just behind the dog that's down there in the bottom there, but there's a lion, there's a donkey, there's a rabbit, there's a few kinds of birds in the trees and so on that get attracted by this guy kind of naturally. Like the way that old cattle women used to sing the animals in for a night once they put them out. Wish I could just throw a clip in here right now, but it's real haunting to see someone come out and start doing this lullaby song, and then cows just coming up out of everywhere to come home for the evening. Kind of like that old phrase, when the cows come home. But quite often it's depicted with snakes or creatures that are somehow like snakes or have some effigy to do with it. You can find that in the ancient Minoans, where there's a open-breasted woman standing there, usually with two different snakes on her sides. She's holding them out, but it doesn't have to necessarily be snakes. And it looks like with each one of these depictions that the connotation is similar, but also different somewhat. For the one where she's holding snakes and the one where you're holding back lions is something different. And the ones where you have sacred creatures like this, which would look like a griffin to somebody, and if you look at the one on the right, well, it's on both of them, but the one on the right shows that it's got a cross on its leg. It's there, and this is Pazuzu. This is a demonic creature from the Sumerians, and people took it all out of whack. In fact, the ancient show The Exorcist tried to take it as some type of demon idea, when the truth and reality is that it's a protector demon versus bad things such as infant death and things like that, which is kind of strange. But so it's got this weird, almost dragon, lionish type effigy that shows on it there, but also the wings that are quite often associated with that. And if you look, there's a hole where his belly is. Looks like you hung it up on there, and two small pins, one on either side, on the right or the left, in the swirl of their tail. And also you can see that he's got on a bullhorn effigy. And so this also designates we're talking about the time of Taurus. And a lot of those, because of people not having a full understanding and carrying it to a time of Aries and so on, are them still relating horns to horns and things like that. It didn't necessarily choke at right at Aries' conjunction there. We still to this day have a problem, though, whenever we look at things like that. And there are other effigies too, but quite often, as it shows in here, it's pictures of lions. Although the picture that's in the background right there, it looks like it's dogs being held up by somebody that has a, kind of like a wizard's hat, curly hair coming out the back. You can see stars and other animals all over the place, flying lions, all kinds of different effigies that are from mythology with this concept. But again, quite often it's snakes, as you see down here, or even that Thracian double eagle symbology that goes on. And it's found in a lot of places, like we're saying, like Greece on the left, although with that effigy, quite often it's showing something that is a mother goose concept, and I went in with. But if you look at the bottom of that, that's also two snakes coming together. Well, it looks like two snakes with double ends coming together, doesn't it? Has somewhat of an Egyptian motif here too, but what you would think of is that, but it's actually a Proto-Indo-European motif. From Iran, we find that same concept we looked at earlier, and right now, I guess I'd like to point out the fact of that buzzard sun effigy, or that winged sun disk idea with a buzzard, that is shown in the earliest dynasties of Egypt, but along with the Master of Beasts and a few other effigies that show connections to Sumerians and other people with their knowledge, but it kind of dies out and ends up with its own thing over a while. But that same effigy of that flying sun disk can be found there. And then in Denmark, we find, well, he's just out of frame slightly, but that other Master of Beasts idea where he's sitting and holding a snake, holding that torque that's there, got one around his neck. He's wearing deer horns, deers are showing up, and so on. And again, so that's a little different. He's not holding these things back anymore, but by the time this dish was made, he was the Master of Beasts. Wearing his little striped outfit and stuff. But there are a lot of connections that can be found here, and it looks like that this is something that comes back again from the Stone Age, where there ended up being that Younger Dryas event and killing off these animals, and instead of being into war with them, they no longer were around. They dwindled around to where you didn't hardly ever see them anymore, and then they were just gone, and became a product of mythology and a twisting of ideas. That and finding dinosaur bones and all of a sudden turning something like a triceratops into a griffin concept or anything like that. And they all seem to come from that same type of idea. Here you see him fishing here, but they don't quite have the rod going on yet, do they? So peering back through the mist of time, we see this actually just everywhere. And some of this symbology seems to come from ancient hunter-gatherers, where they had this master of the forest. In fact, that's where that deer effigy comes from, is Coronis, and a master of the forest. If you've ever really seen Bambi, in the idea they show that this master of the forest that's there is this great stag that helps Bambi out after his mother gets shot, which a lot of people don't quite catch at the first of it. But once you've seen it a few times, you're like, oh, wow. Quite often Disney shows something like that. But in this idea, we can peer back and see that these animals would follow this guy around. It seems exactly the opposite of what we think, where we think that people would follow the herds and so on. The idea here is that this is the guy that made it happen. When he went here, they followed. Whenever he went back, they followed. When they started seeing the birds fly away, they knew what that actually meant, that the seasons were about to change. But they also had calendars, of course, at this time. That's what Stonehenge and these things are about. You know, literally showing you, but with a beam of sunlight showing you, not necessarily where you had to just check it. You could have done that much easier with something that looks like a sundial and so on, but this is something great. But this master of the beast or master of forest all comes back from ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans and this idea of an ancient sun god. And in fact, you can actually see that in all these ancient civilizations if you go back far enough. It really was the sky father, and people have made the connection that that goes back to the Proto-Europeans, because Dios Pater is the day or sky father, and then his counterpart was the night father, or the bad one, or the unknown, and that type of situation. And so we had a flip there, but Dios Pater is where we get Jew Pater from. where we get Zeus from, an ancient storm god. And in fact, more coincidental than anything that we're showing today is the fact that all these separate cultures had a prominent guy came out as being a storm god. And even though they're all a pantheon situation, we're really looking at pretty much monotheism with lesser gods below it at that point, such as Marduk under Zeus. Even El of the Bible started out with a pantheon. It's what Elohim designates. So you can find it even in South American art. So it's something that had to have gone on before even the Amerindians became the Indians, and something they kept to enough to actually show it. But you can find it in the ancient Egyptians too, in a lot of their iconography and stuff that shows you the same idea, which this is an idea of Greece, in ancient Greece. But if you look at the person that's depicted here, that doesn't look familiar to it. It looks like that's from somewhere else either, doesn't it? And the two snakes coming together, but that mother goose concept idea. But most of the times that we find it, it's actually lions. In fact, we find it with the Mesopotamians, as it shows here with this lion effigy. But here we've got a twofold concept, because this is actually shown on the handle, made of ivory, of the Gebel Arak knife, whose blade is actually an incredible representation of flint mapping, like you do to make an arrowhead, but this is to make an elongated knife, an extremely long, fluted and so on, like a ceremonial type knife. And this is shown right on the top of the hilt of it, with just below this, under a marker, is dogs and things like that. The dogs have collars on them and so on. So it's all working together, but it also shows you some connections of earliest Egypt. When I first started referring to this, people called BS on it a lot. And if you looked up Egypt, they did say something about it, but it was a little paragraph long. That became about 3.5 paragraphs a few years later, and I did a video then too showing it, and I didn't have to go flopping around and jumping through hoops to show it to you as much, only about half of it, because they showed half of it. Now it has its own page, and it's like 6 or 7 pages long, or pages worth of information long. So it's amazing how that has really come about and changed during this time where people are trying to be ambiguous and so on. There are a few little flowers that sprouted up, but this is the ancient master of beasts in Egypt. But this is also a Mesopotamian priest coming in at that time, showing you the connections there. And it's also the lion effigy, which nowadays we don't think of lions as being anywhere but deep in Africa. At this time, there was a Barbary or North African lion, and lions actually all over the Near and Middle East. It's the reason you see them so often. So again, we look at something like Greece, and they'll show you that there are women with this effigy too, not just the man overtook the beast or so on. But you can see in her arms there are 2 goose that are there. Her face is made in the shape of what we think of as a heart today, although it may be like a bird effigy if you'll look. Over on the left-hand side is a depiction of an ox head or a bull or Taurus. The master of beasts that she's over is 2 dogs that flank her on either side. And if you look, there are 5 or 6 representations of swastikas all over the place. I had somebody, well, it's been months ago now, ask me with this one video I was doing, which didn't try to go into the subject necessarily, and asked me if he thought the Greeks either knew or actually were part of the ancient Aryans. Look, you can find that in the Minoans and the Etruscans, all over through these places. And in fact, in that idea, you can find it everywhere. In fact, not just places that we show. Now in Greece, that shows up as the female entity, but it's in the 600s BC that you were looking at right there. But then again, this type motif goes on not just where it shows here in Egypt or the Mediterranean and Greece and so on, and Mycenae and things like that, or the Near East. But if we were to go out the screen here, we would be looking at the left-hand side picture here of the giraffe people, which I have another video coming out on here real soon. So hit that like button, subscribe if you're not, make sure if you are. But in this giraffe culture, we find this man here, and he's got snakes around him too, much like the Minoan art one that's not really shown here. If there was a pin at each place, they'd have one. There would be 35 pins all over this, and it'd be out the map on the left and the right. As far as India are past, as far as the Atlantic Ocean going west, and everywhere that Mary went, that lamb was sure to go. So it's kind of crazy that we have these depictions everywhere, all over, even in the ancient Proto-Europeans, where he looks like he's sitting on a little canvas-back chair, or what we would think of a folding canvas-back chair here. But he's a double-headed man, and that's very much like Janus. It's probably the one that we have the most recollection of, which January is named after, by the way. But Janus, this god that has dualities, dual faces, so on like that. But that can be found in the ancient Sumerians. In fact, Enki's sidekick that rode with him on his Magdalene boat all the time was this character that had this ability that no one was going to sneak up on them. He's got eyes in the back of his head. In this variant, though, you can tell it's where it's from because they show these horses which are sitting up, eating out of the hand of these people that are here. So Master of Beasts doesn't always mean holding off lions, although that's an extreme concentration of the idea, but it's done so because that was the one creature that could not be tamed. That's the one creature that was causing him much grief. In fact, if you look into it, what that lion was doing after these people had domesticated all these other animals they show you them hugging with, the lion would come in and attack it. So it's something they had to fight off, just like ancient cave bears and things like that. So here's a connection that goes back, well, this depiction is at least 3,000 years old. But again, we can go to the giraffe culture here, and we see scorpions, Master of Beasts idea, and he's got something that looks like a leopard with all of its insets. And then there he is with that handbag that everybody knows everything about, and everybody's looked at and kind of went, oh, I don't know what the hell it is, and they want to run from the idea and act like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that. The connections here we're talking about, they come from a common people. The artistic styles, the way things are made. Whether it's that candelabra there that's done in a wax replacement concept idea of forging, or whether you have something like this that's been panned or beaten out in a way, in a relief concept, just like they do on the walls and so on. And to me, there is a drastic difference between a Master of Beast pose and this pose right here. But then again, if you think about it, whenever they have that harmony situation, playing a song, singing a song or whatever, and the animals all come up, like in Snow White, like they play off in Shrek, where she all of a sudden then hits a high note and the thing blows up like a balloon and pops and she steals his eggs for breakfast. That kind of idea where Thumper and all the animals want to come around and see it in this sacred grove and a forest and situation. But this has a lot to do with that and rights and people being at one with nature and so on. And again, I make the reference of ancient elves and situations like that we talked about. And you can see that concept in the way that they lived. In fact, people that we rarely can find a trace of are these people which apparently heralded civilization, of the Western civilization, but very much a portion of Eastern civilization too. Kind of crazy. Master of Beasts. It's something that we can find stretched out through all kinds of areas and spanning over a time of at least 4,000 years. And if we figured in that one cave art, or the few cave arts we found that have it there, going back to the Younger Dryas, we're looking at well over 10,000 years, or kind of 12,000 years now worth of time this has been going on. But it's not something we show as often. But when I was a kid and I first learned about it, and I had a chance to drink a Lowenbrow beer, and it had these lions on it that were facing like that, but the Lowenbrow symbol was in the center rather than the other guy, I was like, hold on a second. Anyhow, let me know what you think down below, guys. We'll get on to another one here. Just some connections here showing you connected people, mythology, symbology, and the others. Peace.